So today's theme is EOSC Governance and Association. We begin this session at 9 with priorities for the EOSC implementation phase, topics and charters for the EOSC Association, advisory groups, and task forces. This session will be chaired by Karel Luyben, who's the president of the EOSC Association. We'll have a break at 10:45, and then we start again at 11:15 with priorities, projects, and partnerships, identifying and addressing challenges for the EOSC implementation phase. And this will be chaired by Sarah Jones, one of the directors of the EOSC Association. Today as well, we'll be having a lunch and EOSC clinic. So be sure to grab a bite to eat and join us for a highly interactive session with Karel, Klaus Tochtermann, as well as Sarah. We then commence again at 2 p.m. with the session on research careers and curricula, chaired by Maria Luisa Lavitrano. For the first session of today, next slide please, we have priorities for EOSC implementation phase, chaired by Karel. This will begin with his introduction, and then with a presentation on the EOSC Association advisory groups. And then we'll go into the Q&A session before we go into the break. Now I pass the floor to Karel Luyben, who will be starting the session. Karel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rob, I should say. And I am sharing my screen if everything is okay. And I would like to welcome everybody to this session where we will discuss the implementation and especially the advisory groups and task forces we are forming within the association at this moment. What I would like to start off with is saying that the program partnerships, which we're going to sign with the European Union, and on behalf of the European Union, the Commission will of course sign on the 23rd of June, offers us a real, let's say, clearly visible road ahead, hopefully to the sunshine with respect to EOSC. This development will be indeed a co-programmed effort where the Commission will put in over the period of Horizon Europe something like almost 500 million euro in supportive projects, and the association has committed itself in this partnership to have the same amount, also something like 500 million in kind, contributing to the developments which are laid out in the SCRIA for the first 2 years and which will be laid out for the other years in the next version of the SCRIA. And therefore we need the task forces and the advisory groups. The tasks they will do and the aim they will have is to help us in creating what we call ecosystem, where this federating core will be developed over time, where the AAI will be managed, the PID policies will be taken care of, and where there will be a sort of compliance framework for the whole system. And of course, the trusted certification of the things that come into this. We will do outreach to stakeholders, evidently, and monitor the services and transactions. And we will sort of manage the trademark of EOSC in a way we have to discuss with the Commission. And of course, all of this has to contribute to the policy we set out together with the European Union. And in order to do this, we have created a number of task forces within a number of advisory groups that are not going to do the actual work. They're going to combine all the information we get from the projects, from the existing and future projects, from other parties, and from organizations that contribute to this whole system. So the association is basically a knot in a very complex network where we combine all the stakeholders, as well the research performing, the research funding, as the service providing organization. We've created 5 topics, we have chosen 5 topics: implementation of EOSC, technical challenges of EOSC, metadata and data quality, research careers and curricula, and sustaining EOSC. Topics we consider important for the long run. And within these topics, we have then put a number of what we call task forces in the advisory groups. The advisory groups is a title which is in our statutes, And it also is probably better than working groups because the aim of these groups is that they will contribute to the system in advising the board of the association. The different task forces will be explained by the people that give the presentations today, which you can see here. These implementations of EOSC will be handled by Suzanne Dumouchel. The technical challenges will be presented by Ignacio Blanquer. We have per advisory group 2 of our board members that liaise, and in the metadata and data quality, the first one is Sarah Jones, but today the other one, Klaus Tochtermann, will give the presentation on the metadata and data quality. And then Wilhelm Widmark will present the task forces within the area of research, careers and curricula. And finally, Bob Jones on the sustaining of the EOSC. Now, the question that arises most likely and has arisen yesterday is who will be the task force members? Well, that has to be defined after this round of writing the charters. We have asked a startup group. We have invited all our members to join those, and we had more than 255 responses to write charters, and we have selected 4 coordinators per task force in order to do this job. And I have a problem here. Okay, thank you. To be, we have asked 4 coordinators to write these charters, and these charters are now being set online already. You can find them on the website, and we will discuss them this week, and especially during days 3 and 4 of the symposium. The call for membership will be opening this week, and we will then select the members for those task forces. And we will ask the coordinators that did the charter writing to do this selection with us and come forward with proposals. And we will ask the task forces to come forward with suggestions for the chairs of those task forces. And since the drafting of the Horizon Europe program is starting already the second half of this year for the period 23-24, right after the summer, we also need to start quickly with those task forces. I'm sorry, I cannot switch off this phone. Back to the program. After this introduction, there will be a presentation by Suzanne on the implementation, as I said, a presentation by Ignacio on the technical challenges, and a presentation on the metadata and data quality by Klaus Tochtermann. Then the last 2 will be by Wilhelm Widmark and by Bob Jones on research data, research careers and curricula and sustaining EOSC. And then we will end up in a Q&A session. Let me apologize for the noise on the background, and let me hand over to the first speaker of our session, Suzanne Dumouchel, and stop sharing my screen. I hope that jointly we can, let's say, create EOSC. Suzanne.
Thank you, Karel. Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'd like to, I'm opening the session with this, the advisory group on the implementation of EOSC. So next slide, please. So what are the aims and the objective of this advisory group? So what we can say that it's that it addresses the following operational objective of the 3 years. So I've quoted the 3 main operational objectives, but actually it has an impact and it plays a role in several other objectives. But let's start with the first one, the main one. The 004, co-develop domain-specific standards and adopt open science practices through the engagement with research community during the lifespan of the partnership. So it's more linked to the task force research engagement. Then you have the 009, implement and evolve the EOSC rules of participation and onboarding process for EOSC providers and increase the number of service providers and services offered progressively over the course of the partnership. So here it's more linked to the task force rules of participation. And then you have the last one, the 0011, implement the EOSC persistent identifiers, PID, policy and architecture by 2025. So these are the aims and objectives of generally of this advisory group. Let's move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So about the structure of this advisory group. So as I already said, so the implementation of the EOSC is divided in three different task forces: PID, policy and implementation, researcher engagement and adoption, and rules of participation, compliance monitoring. You can see then the name of the drafting coordinators of the charters that I will just present quickly right after this slide, and the number of the task force members in each of these task force. We can see already that there are more members in the researcher engagement and adoption than in the two other, which is I guess quite easily which can be easily explained as this task force researcher engagement and adoption is a new one, and the PID policy and implementation and rules of participation are more the follow-up of previous work done in the previous working group. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's start with the outline of the PID policy and implementation task force. So the main aims are to provide input to the next 3R version, starting from the gaps identified in the PID ecosystem. So I won't enter into detail, but the high number of gaps have been identified in the previous 3R version. So here the goal is to start answering and providing a solution to these gaps. To monitor and provide community feedback on the implementation of the EOSC PID policy and architecture, and to make recommendations to the EC for the integration of PID services in the EOSC ecosystem, its implementation and test. It's also an important part of this task force. Next slide, please. So what can be the dependency of this task force related to some other task force or even other kind of other project or initiative? So here mainly it has been mentioned by the group, the technical interoperability of data and services. So it can be there can be an overlap here and the need to collaborate, as well as on the metadata and data quality topic. There is also an impact or a need of collaboration and synergy with the long-term data preservation aspect. You have also the metadata and data quality task force and the rules of participation, which is part of the same advisory group. Next slide, please. So regarding the membership, what is expected for this task force is to have a number of between 15 and 20 members. It's a task force which will have a planned duration of 24 months, more or less. And in terms of selection criteria for joining the task force, it's more to have quite a diversity of PID experts, I would say, so PID users, experts and providers, to be able to prove record of expertise related to PID, and to ensure diversity across discipline and the use of the variety of persistent identifiers. So let's move now to the second task force. Thank you, the researcher engagement and adoption task force. So here the goal is more, the aim is to suggest measures to increase the participation of the research communities and research performing organizations in EOSC from all European regions as well as associated countries, to identify the research community needs and requirements for research and research environment, to ensure a balance and involvement and representation for the interdisciplinary and domain perspective on the one hand, and the international and institutional perspective on the other hand. There is also the goal to ensure that the EOSC services will be of actual use to the research community and users, to support the engagement of researchers and their community with EOSC so that their feedback, needs and requirements are integrated into the development of EOSC, and to ensure that the EOSC services will be based on the well understood and adopted offering from the current research infrastructure landscape. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what are the main output planned for this task force? Suggested strategy and action to be taken up by EC-funded project national initiatives. So this is one of the output, to develop a set of incentives and rewards to strengthen research community engagement with EOSC as part of the broader engagement framework, and to develop a coherent narrative or explanation of the role of EOSC for the end users, especially the research community, also addressing the misconception about what EOSC is and what can offer, which is, I think, a very important point. Regarding the dependency of this task force, so of course there are different kind of links to be done with different EOSC projects that are mentioned here, but also with regional, national, and institutional initiative linked to the open science. Also to research infrastructure cluster and network organization. And dependency between this and other task force will be identified much more after the first charter documents are finalized. But we can already mention that the task force research career and curricula, for instance, has already been mentioned. Next slide, please. Thank you. Regarding the membership, so 20 members more or less have been envisioned for this task force, with also a planned duration of 24 months. And here, in terms of criteria, it's more to have really a mix of competencies from the member of the EOSC Association, and in terms of diversity of organization, thematic service providers, funding organization, discipline focused, and yeah. So the main aspect, the criteria, is to ensure a strong diversity inside this task force. Let's move to the third and last thank you task force. So this is the rules of participation compliance monitoring. So the main aims are to ensure that the entry requirements of EOSC bridge from the principles expressed in the current high-level EOSC rules of participation are more practical criteria for the implementation. To define at what level the rules of participation can be reasonably monitored, and set in a place of framework to enable such monitoring alongside other key stakeholders. To draw in community involvement in the setting of rules of participation and other entry requirements, and to establish a durable structure that can take on the ongoing activities and continue them after the task force concludes. And in terms of output, there is this idea of a new and updated rules and monitoring systems, an initial EOSC appeal group with a basic set of procedures and a method to be contacted and developed, and a monitoring plan which set out the level at which monitoring will be performed and the activities needed to perform it. Next slide, thank you. So in terms of dependency, it has been mentioned already, the task force PID policy and implementation. And mainly, so it's not really a dependency, but the need to create synergy with the EOSC provider and resource profile that are filled in by the providers in order to better work together and see and develop the synergies. And the last, thank you. The last slide regarding the membership. So more or less 30 members are expected for this task force, with also the same duration of 24 months. And the selection criteria are very open. It's first the volunteers, and again, representative of the key stakeholders. So ensuring a diversity of the members of this task force. So that's it for my part. Thank you very much. And I think I can give the floor now directly to Ignacio.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. So I will continue explaining the work that has been done in the frame of the task forces related with the advisory group of technical challenge of EOSC, which I have the pleasure of being act as a liaison along with my colleague Klaus Tochtermann. So next slide, please. So this advisory group is very focused on the technical part, which has some implications on the way the work will be done. So the main focus is on the implementation of the technical architecture and interoperability with EOSC, but also it has an important area, dedicated task force for the part of the infrastructure for sharing quality research software. So all these works will require, as Karel mentioned at the beginning, the work from beyond the task forces, from the collaboration of the activities on the different projects, and the group will base on the documents that we already have from previous projects, and also with the results that will arise from the future from EOSC related projects. Considering the operational objectives that are depicted in this RIA, we choose these 4 as the main objectives that we identified currently with the plans that we have proposed. That the task forces have proposed, not we. So operation objective 1, that is focused on the minimum viable EOS to share openly different kinds of objects, but especially software, which is the topic of one of the task forces. The operational objective 5, which is focus on technical components for the FAIR ecosystem, which is one of the main areas in another task force, the task force related, the other 2 task forces actually. The operational objective 7, which is of the co-developing of the first generation of a network infrastructure for software source code, and operational objective 10, which is focused on the operation and deployment of an authentication authorization infrastructure, which is the main focus of one of the task forces. So next slide, please. So the structure of this advisory group is focused on 3 task forces, as we mentioned: the technical interoperability of data and services. I put the link of the draft charter that is available on the website that you can find it easily. That has 15 members for draft coordination that was selected. I also underline the person that will make the presentation in detail tomorrow at 2 p.m. In the session dedicated to this task forces. So the other one is infrastructure of quality research software, also with which is the one that has more people volunteering to draft the charter for these task forces, this task force. And the last one is the AII architecture, which also has 19 members. So next slide, please. So let's go one by one. So first, the outline, the objectives and the activities of the task force dedicated to the technical interoperability of data and services. So this task will take the well-known EOSC interoperability framework and will exploit it, extend it with recommendation around technical architectures as a starting point, right? With the idea of helping in development of the EOSC core and exchange as described in this RIA. The types of activities that have been identified is exploring and engaging with the community, including industry-related activities that will be identified, to promote and coordinate the federation of thematic services, infrastructure services, and generic services along with datasets, and to advance on the composability of resources, which is a very interesting and important point towards the multidisciplinarity and one of the added values of EOSC. So next slide. The outputs expected for this task force as a first principal document in which the definitions, concepts will be stated and agreed. This is very important when you are dealing with technical work that has many different dimensions and interpretation, and it's very important to have this base. A landscape overview with identifying capabilities and gaps for the interoperability framework. A draft technical architecture with an inventory of category of services, format, access protocols, and other technical issues that have been identified, and a technical architecture description of the interoperability framework, including examples for the adaptation. The timeline for this task force is 24 months, with typically reconsidering some of the objectives after the first year of operation. So next slide, please. Yes, thanks. So the second task force is the AII architecture, which is focused on delivering a consistent architecture for authentication, authorization, and access control for EOSC, based on SRI and the previous outcomes of the other task forces and working groups. So the main aims of this task force are the evolution of the existing architecture for AII, following the ARC blueprint architecture and the interoperability guidelines, as well as identifying and assessment requirements, and gaps identified in the frame of the work, and collaboration with other bodies inside and outside EOSC. So because this is a very widely of wide interest topic, it will require collaboration. It will benefit from collaboration even beyond the EOSC concept. So, and finally, identification and assessment of governance models for the EOSC AAI. So next slide. So the outputs of this task force is the development of the next version of the EOSC AAI architecture, and versions for the, in 2 versions for each one at the end of each year, to engage with the stakeholders to identify new use cases and requirements, again with 2 versions, analyze governance models for the EOSC AAI. So next slide. So the final or the last and third task force is the one dedicated to infrastructure for quality research software. So this task force has 2 main objectives. One is to related to the deployment of development of tools for the research software. So first is to allow researchers to properly archive, reference, describe, and share and reuse research software with proper metadata, in particular service software used to build the services offered through EOSC. And the second is to improve the quality from the technical and organizational point of view. Along with this technical objective, there is another objective, which is to increase the recognition to software developers and maintainers, because software is a valuable research result on par with publication and data, especially on the open science landscape. So next slide. Yes, so the outputs of this task force is broad disseminations of the EOSC scholarly infrastructure for research software report, and actively engaging with other infrastructure provided for research software, especially with the project related with EOSC, to explore tools, standards, platform used in the state-of-the-art software development and for quality control, and formulate actionable recommendations, which are based on best practices, quality research, baselines, and quantitative and qualitative methodologies to provide these unbiased measurements of quality. And finally, to explore the existing education and training programs about software development that are viable implemented. So next slide. Well, these 3 task forces, as I mentioned, are highly technically oriented. So it requires a lot of cooperation with many bodies and many boards and many working groups and projects related with the EOSC. So I will try to depict here the 3 task forces in blue circles in the middle, more or less. And on the right side, we have other task forces in which the drafters of the task forces have identified that the cooperation is needed. For sure, there will be more cooperation that will arise along the work of the task force, but these are those that are identified. It is interesting to see that task forces from all the other advisory groups have been identified. So it will require a lot of interaction. On the left side, there's a lot of arrows that try to show the connections and relations that have been already identified with other groups, especially EOSC projects, with a special interest, of course, in EOSC Future, which is a major project in development of the technical solution that will be required, but also other EOSC projects that have been mentioned in the task force drafts. Also, national EOSC activities, working groups like those of the RDA, and many other initiatives at national level or a vertical level by the scientific communities, even also considering federated infrastructure, especially for the implementation of the technical interoperability and AII. So next slide. That's my final slide. So with respect to the membership, the coordinators of the draft writing have not specified in 2 of the cases a predefined size. I think that the complexity and the wide range of objectives will require that to check more in advance how will be the actual best size. Instead, for the case of infrastructure for quality research software, which are envisaging I would say fairly big amount of people, from 30 to 50, considering that the high interest that this task force has had. With respect to the profiles of the people that should be included, or at least from the point of view of the draft charter coordinators, basically there's a need of technical experts on different domains, representative of thematic communities and end users. For the case of the interoperability, there are many disciplines that in which the interoperability of data will have different dimensions and requires cooperations. For the quality of research software, also users are on the top of the spot, considering users as researchers, software developers and engineers, and representative of other communities and platforms, especially for the part of the promotion of the recognition of the software as a major asset. And with respect to the AII, of course, this is a more narrow topic, narrow, in the focus, which make easy to identify which are the members that could be the right candidate for this task force, which are basically AII experts, infrastructure and service providers, and projects that are developing activities on this area. And I think that's my last presentation. And I like the slide, and thank you. And I pass the floor to my colleague Klaus for the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. I will be reporting on the advisory group on metadata and data quality, which was chaired by Sarah Jones, and I was the co-chair, but have the honor to present now the results. Could we go to the next slide, please? So what are the aims of and objectives of this advisory group? It's pretty much the focus on the implementation of the FAIR agenda within EOSC. And for that purpose, we have two different foci. One is on addressing the semantic interoperability, which is needed for the discoverability and reusability of the data and the metadata. In addition to that, of course, we want to ensure that the data which is accessible via the EOSC is of high quality, and we want to promote the high quality resources. And in order to measure the quality, we also need metrics. The group, of course, will not start from scratch. There's lots of materials around, and I've just listed here 2 or 3. Of course, we all know the report on the recommendations on FAIR metrics for EOSC, the FAIR practice report, and the EOSC interoperability framework. The link to the operational objectives of the TRIA is there. I've listed 4 of the operational objectives. So this advisory group will deliver components to the minimum viable EOSC. We will provide the technical components of a FAIR ecosystem. Another contribution is the contribution to operational objective number 6, that is the provision of metrics and tools to measure the adoption of the FAIR principles, and also the operational objective number 12, which is the development of a minimum metadata framework. Next slide, please. Here is how we have organized the advisory group. We have split up the work into 2 task forces. One is on FAIR metrics and data quality. So this one is more related to the data and fairness issues. And the second one is on the semantics and the semantic interoperability. On the right side, you see the names of the drafting coordinators. I do not want to list them all, but I want to thank them for their motivation and enthusiasm they have shown over the past week during the development of the charter. Next one. So I go now step by step through the 2 task forces. First one, FAIR metrics and data quality. What is the overall objective? The overall objective is to oversee the implementation of FAIR metrics for the EOSC. We want to test them within the different research communities, because it's not clear whether a FAIR metrics which fits for one research community does also fit for another one. The same applies to data quality. We also want to define what is good quality of data. because yeah, as you know, data and the quality of the data very much depends on the different communities. So the aim is, so these were the overall objectives. The aim with relation to fair metrics is to existing assessment tools in a variety of contexts, and to make recommendations for the improvement or applicability of these metrics within different contexts. As to the data quality, we want to clarify a little bit what data quality is and what are appropriate quality attributes and dimensions, because they vary strongly within and across the discipline. So exploring what quality of data means within the different communities, we want to derive the most relevant quality dimensions for the EOSC. The expected output of this task force is pretty much a set of reports which go through 3 different circles. Version 1 is ready end of the first year, end of month 18, the second one. And these reports will be, of course, communicated with the community so that we can incorporate the feedback we receive from there, which then results in a final report at the end of the second year, which also shows that this task force will run for 24 months. Next one, please. As to semantic interoperability, the task force will start from the EOSC interoperability framework. It will look into ways to further foster, and that is important, the knowledge exchange in the discourse among the different expert groups. And the specific aim is to create a synergy among the existing work related to semantic interoperability. We want to explore what the different EOSC projects do, what approaches are followed by other projects in which members of the task force are involved. And the reason or the objective is to explore the different approaches or aspects of semantic interoperability, to foster and promote the knowledge exchange among the different groups, and finally derive recommendations which are needed for the further development of EOSC. The expected output is, of course, event organizations, because we expect a higher demand of communication, exploration, knowledge exchange. And the results from these dialogues, discourses will feed into a report and guidelines for data and service providers, but also guidelines for how service level agreements should look like. Next slide, please. Here is how, a similar graphic as Ignacio, here is how it relates to other activities, because at least semantic interoperability also has a strong technical focus. And on the right-hand side, you see task forces from other advisory groups, for example, semantic interoperability certainly related to PID policies and PID implementation, and fair metrics and data quality should be related, in our opinion, to digital long-term preservation of the data, because we do not want to long-term preserve all the data, but only the data which is considered to be of good quality. On the left-hand side, you see external activities. Many things already exist. For example, within the context of fair metrics, we have GoFair, we have within RDA working groups and interest groups. We have, if you look at EOSC project, the Fairs Fair project, most prominently at the moment, of course, the EOSC Future project. But what these projects have delivered and will be delivered will also be of great importance for these 2 task forces. And if you go further external, then we have all the groups and activities which were already explained by Ignacio. Next slide, please. Here are the skills and competences needed for the candidates who will join these task forces. For fair metrics and data quality, we take into account that already a good level of expertise around fair data is there, and therefore we need good and deep knowledge and skills on fair metrics and fair data policies. We need, of course, a good knowledge and competences in the field of metadata standards and a more general metadata management. If we look at the semantic interoperability task force, here, yeah, that is more technical, I would say. Of course, we need ontology know-how. How can you model ontologies? How can you align different ontologies with one another? That is certainly an important aspect. Data engineering is related to that, but also metadata standard and controlled vocabularies, because as we know, for different domains, we have different vocabularies which can describe best the specific aspects of the different domains. And if you go further down on the semantic interoperability, it gets more and more technical. So the size, maybe to finish with that, the Fair Metrics task force, that is the recommendation from the drafting group, should not be larger than 20 to 25 people. For the semantic interoperability task force, we don't have a specific size. I think that's it, and I would like to hand over to Wilhelm now. Thank you.
Thank you, Klaus. And I will present the advisory group on research, careers, and curricula. And the liaison from the board has been me and Maria Luisa Lavitrano. Next, please. So the aims of the advisory group. The task forces within the advisory groups focus on the training and skills agenda. Multiple stakeholder groups are addressed, specifically research communities, data stewards, and national bodies. And key inputs is the digital skills for fair and open science report. And it will address some operational objectives from the SRIA, increasingly mainstream open science skills in European research performing organization, including through the uptake of curricula and training frameworks related to data stewardship through the lifespan of the partnership, and to co-design and adopt a reward and recognition framework for fair and open data practices in research during the lifespan of the partnership. Next, please. And the structure, we have 3 task forces within it. It's the data stewardship, curricula and career path, research, careers, recognition and credit, and upskilling countries to engage in EOSC. And on the right hand, you can see the drafting coordinators, and we have around 10 members in all of these groups. Next, please. So the data stewardship, curricula and career path, their main aims are to focus on the data steward role and their core activities, develop recommendation for potential career paths, and actively engage with stakeholders and disseminate their work. And the expected outputs are a stakeholder list, a clarified terminology around data steward and data stewardship, a definition of minimal data stewardship curriculum, a recommendation for data steward career path, and implementation of examples using use cases. Next, please. And the input from other task forces is, of course, the research, career recognition and credit, and the upskilling countries to engage in EOSC within the same advisory group. Next, please. And they have thought that it should be suitable with 25 to 30 members. And the selection criteria is to focus on relevant skills for delivering task force remits, prioritize association members and observers, prioritize people who add value to EOSC, ensure research community inputs, and that is really important, include key project representatives responsible for implementation, and of course, ensure diversity and balance. Next, please. So then we have the Research Careers Recognition and Credit Task Force, which main aims are to address incentives and rewards for researchers to manage and share their data, code, and other research outputs, activities, and processes. Make criteria of open science and fair principles an integral part of academic career progression and grant assessment processes. Identify various research stakeholder groups and their specific roles and responsibilities in support of embedding incentives and rewards for research in assessment processes. And the expected outputs are a landscape analysis of existing high-level initiatives and good practices, and to identify open science principles that underline the good practice and initiatives, to develop recommendations targeted to different stakeholders for improving recognition system and credit, and to define a future monitoring strategy for the implementation of recommendations and practices. Next, please. And the other task forces they had to work with is the data stewardship and curricula, upskilling countries, and research engagement and adoption. Next, please. And they think it should be between 20 to 25 members, and the selections criteria should involve as many stakeholders group as possible. Members should commit to active contribution in all discussions and participate in the development of all outputs of the group. And it should pursue diverse representation in terms of gender, discipline, and so on. Next, please. And the last task force, upskilling countries to engage in EOSC. The main aims are to develop a scoping instrument allowing comparative analysis of the state of the preparedness related to skills and education on a national level. Capture the information and providing a comparative analysis and suggestions for the pathways for upskilling open science on a national level. Support the dialogue of stakeholders involved in open science education developments, open science policy making, upskilling models and strategies on a national level across Europe. And the expected outputs are a list describing national situations regarding open science education, to identify open science education models in different countries, to produce a limited number of national reports, and to launch a communication campaign around country champions and possible steps for open science education at a national level. Next, please. And they have to work with the data stewardship, the research careers and recognition, and the researchers' engagement and adoption. Next, please. And they think it should be around 30 members. And the selections criteria are stakeholders active in open science education as research communities, research performing organization, national representatives, European universities associations, implementers and founders, and it should be a balance of educators, academics, technicians, managers, and policymakers. Next, please. And that was the last for me. Thanks. And now I'm over to Bob Jones.
Yep, thanks very much, Wilhelm. Good morning, everybody. You'll be pleased to know this is the final presentation about the advisory group charters before the Q&A session. Myself, Bob Jones, and Ronan Byrne have been the liaisons for this advisory group preparation. Next slide, please. So the main aims and objectives of the advisory group on sustaining EOSC are sort of to do with the future sustainability of EOSC and the funding models and long-term data preservation. It will use as a key input the solutions for a sustainable EOSC, otherwise known as the Fair Lady Report, that was produced by the previous executive board and touched already on many of the subjects around sustainability of EOSC and long-term data preservation, also making use of a number of studies that were commissioned by the EOSC Secretariat project. So it will be the exploration of funding models that will enable long-term financial sustainability to building and sustaining the key European Open Science Cloud elements that are linked to the architecture, as you've seen. And the long-term open data archives and the preservation services are definitely required to enable a sustainable EOSC and a sustainable access to data. And that is highlighted in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. One of the points that came about in this report was that the roles and responsibilities and accountability for digital preservation are currently not very well defined in the Strategic Research Innovation Agenda. So that's going to be one of the key objectives as well. Next slide, please. So the structure of the advisory group in sustaining EOSC has two task forces, defining funding models, and the coordination group there include Françoise Ake-Cozon, Jan Meyer, Ornella De Giacomo, and Rupert Luck. And there were 19 other volunteers contributing to the drafting of the charter that you can find online. Similarly, for long-term data preservation, the coordinators were Christo Luf, Ingrid Dillo, Pio-Lina Frostrom, and Ricardo Smaghelia, and supported with 12 drafting volunteers. Next slide, please. So starting with the long-term data preservation task force, in alignment with the Strategic Research Innovation Agenda for EOSC, the task force will provide recommendations on the vision and sustainable implementation of long-term data preservation policies and practices, including suggestions for subsequent strategy periods or phases of EOSC. Okay? And it will address, of course, matters related to the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders. As we said, that's not very clear at the moment, and the financial aspects of long-term data preservation and associated data infrastructure needs. The expected outputs include a shared understanding and vision of the long-term data preservation. Currently, there's different interpretations of what that vision should be, mapping of the roles and responsibilities and accountabilities within that vision, and recommendations for the European network of trustworthy digital repositories, together with recommendations for the data services to connect to this network, and a roadmap to future mature the long-term data preservation services of these repositories, because, as has been said several times, EOSC is not just a single step. It's going to be quite a long journey, and we have to imagine how these services are going to improve over time. Next slide, please. So that has a number of dependencies on other task forces, the defining funding models in the same advisory group for the financial aspects, but looking across the other advisory groups, working with the FAIR matrix and data quality, technical interoperability, of course, of data and services, the PID policy and implementation, data stewardships, curricula and career paths, so also to ensure that it is well known by the researchers at large and as part of their training, the importance of data preservation, of course, and researcher engagement and adoption linked to the whole idea of open science. And then the infrastructure for quality research software. One also has to consider about the preservation of the software in these aspects as well. Next slide, please. In terms of membership, there's no predefined size, but there are specific expertise that is required. We have a number of experts around Europe. We'd like them to participate in digital preservation in its different aspects. I won't go through the full list. You can see it there as well. And also representatives from the digital preservation community, the repository certification community, and so on. And of course, the research infrastructures and e-infrastructures as well. Next slide, please. Moving on to defining funding models task force. So here, of course, the main objective of this task force is by 2023 to produce a proposal for the long-term financial sustainability of the main building blocks of EOSC. And by the main building blocks, they mean the key elements that are described in the architecture. So EOSC Core, EOSC Exchange, and the federation of data and the data services. So they want to develop and validate scenarios for financial sustainability of these main building blocks. And a key important point of this is to validate the feasibility of such scenarios with the relevant stakeholders and ensure that they're aligned with the national and European level policies and legislation. The key outputs are foreseen in Q3 of 2022, a first set of models discussed with the relevant stakeholders. And then in Q2 of 2023, validated scenarios and recommendations. Next slide, please. So there's a number of dependencies. First of all, important to work with the rules of participation to determine who will actually be participating in the EOSC ecosystem and on what grounds. Then, of course, the technical challenges of EOSC to make sure we have a better understanding of the architectural aspects, if we're talking about the key blocks there, and a deeper insight into EOSC Exchange and how it is intended to work. And of course, the researcher engagement and adoption to ensure the results of this task force match the expectations of the researchers and the requirements and needs of the researchers. And then, of course, long-term data preservation to ensure that both task forces are aligned. Next slide, please. So here they expect up to 30 members. The criteria is an important one is the ability to commit time to this task force. And we need legal and financial expertise in this to come up with this sustaining EOSC model. Of course, the pan-European and international research infrastructure management is very important as well. An experience of business processes of providing subscription-based services to research organizations. Data management goes without question, along with data practitioners. Also legal, economics, and administrative expertise at national, international level, and knowledge of EOSC-related national and European policies in infrastructure landscapes. Of course, a diverse number of stakeholders need to be represented to ensure that the scenarios are going in the right direction and likely to be taken on board. The next slide, please. So I just thanks there, and now hand back to Karel for the organization of the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Bob. And I would like to thank first of all the speakers, Suzanne, Ignacio, Klaus, Wilhelm, and you, Bob, with special thanks to you, because I think it's your birthday today, Bob. And if that's true, congratulations from everybody.
Yeah, well, you're making me older than I am. It's not quite yet.
Thank you. Can I share my screen again, Rob? So this was the program for the presentations, and all the speakers have been keeping well in time, and we have much more time for discussion now. What I would like to do is first go into a number of items that were raised in the chat before opening the real Q&A session. And we had anticipated some of the questions like size, duration, reapplying or not, the difference between the working groups we had before and the advisory groups now, details on how to select, etc. Let me present a few slides first, and then give hopefully an answer to several of the questions, and then we can go into the discussion. Okay, so who will be the task force members? As I said before, this has to be defined still. We work in 2 steps. And maybe to go a little bit back in time, there were the working groups of the executive board in the past, but the executive board was a group from the commission, an expert group from the commission, doesn't exist anymore. So the working groups don't exist anymore as well. But many of these working group people have done an enormous job, and they of course would like to continue working with the EOSC, and in this case, the EOSC Association. So we have set up the following system by defining a number of domains, 5 domains, which are relevant for the longer term, and then creating task forces within these domains. We have created flexibility. These domains have to be, let's say, agreed on by the General Assembly, and we most likely expect them to do. But the flexibility within these domains is that we can change the task forces over time. Now, if task forces need more than the, let's say, suggested 1 or 2 years, they will and can continue, of course. But every period, the task force sets a goal, and we will reiterate whether this is the right task force to continue or whether it's another topic that needs to be addressed in the near future. So it is not said that per definition task forces will evaporate after 1 or 2 years. That's the period we have suggested. By the way, most of the task forces in their drafting have chosen for the 2 years period, which I think is a good choice. They might be able to go on after that, depending, of course, on the need of that particular work. So the advisory groups will not have members, the task forces will have members, and a combination of task forces will form an advisory groups, and we will have liaison persons, as you have seen from the board, linking to these advisory groups and thus to the task forces. Now, that answers a few questions with respect to the duration. So we have now gone through the stage of drafting the charters for these task forces. We have draft charters, which are online on the website, and each charter has a statement on membership, noting requirements, skills, and suggested group size, as you've heard from the presenters today. And if necessary, we'll have to make a selection. That doesn't mean that the rest of the world cannot participate. These task forces have to work in a very open manner. And I've seen some good suggestions already in the chat, like having an inner core of a contributing group that can really work together and have a larger scale of people that vote or that reflect on the material, maybe even only in a read-only matter, as some have suggested. These are all matters we have to discuss. But yes, we want to be as open as possible. Yes, we want to be as inclusive as possible. But yes, we also have to be able to work. And if you have a task force of a couple of hundred people, they cannot work, of course, but they have to be involved. So after this drafting process and after going through the drafts, and we have looked at most of the drafts already, we need an iteration on those drafts, by the way, but then at the meantime, we will set out a call for members. Do members of the drafting group have to reapply? Yes, that's in order for the administration to be sure that we can only allow people to be a member of one task force. Otherwise, it becomes extremely complicated. We hope to finish this process before the summer break. So that says something about the size and says something about the time process. What are the selection criteria if we have to select? Well, we have to focus, first of all, on the skills, on the things the task force has to work on, has to deliver, as been mentioned again by the speakers a minute ago. We will prioritize members and observers of the association. Of course, these are task forces of the association. We also will prioritize on people that can add value to the EOSC. Again, of course, because that's what we do it for. And we will ensure that there is research community input. This is what we do it for. We do it for the research. So we will include project representatives responsible for the implementation as much as possible. And as you have also heard from various speakers, we will work on diversity with respect to gender, country, career stage, stakeholder category, organization member, etc., as much as possible over the task forces and within the task forces. Now, the next question that comes up, I haven't seen it in the chat, but it has come up at several places already. Who will share the task forces? Well, each task force will make its own suggestions for who will share the task forces. Any member of a task force can volunteer to chair and be proposed by the group. In the end, it's the board that appoints as well the members as the chairs of the task force. And of course, on the recommendation of the drafters of the work of that particular task force. We will ask each task force to come up with 2 chairs, 1 male and 1 female, to have a, let's say, good distribution of that type of work. And we will intend again to bring a balance across the task force chairs in terms of stakeholders, countries, etc. represented. A few more words about the size. First of all, we will open up the membership in this period of the symposium, but we will not close the membership call. So also in the future, people can ask to become a member of a task force, like we did with the working groups. In the course of the time, the working groups were running and people were added if needed. And the same thing will happen to the task forces. Of course, as I said, it has to be manageable in a sense that we have task forces that can really operate. As has been suggested somewhere in the chat, a larger group that is a sounding board, like in the W3C consortium, is an interesting suggestion. So we will definitely look at the suggestions made in order to be as inclusive as possible. And with that, I would like to, let's say, stop my continued presentation of before and see how we are going to handle the chat. Maybe I invite some of the members that give presentations as well to pick up items from the chat they would like to iterate on or would like to reflect on. I've seen some of my board members answering to some of the chat questions already. So may I invite the board members to reply in verbal terms to some of the questions. Klaus. I got the impression, Klaus, you wanted to say something, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay, somebody else. Some of the other. Yes, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, there's questions about the timing of defining the sustainability models for EOSC. It's recognized that this is always an urgent piece of work, right? But we also have to be realistic. We are looking for a model that will help us during the lifetime of the partnership and beyond. And we also have to be realistic that we have to convince a significant number of stakeholders to take on their defined role and responsibilities. So this is not going to take a few months, it will take longer than that.
Thank you, Bob. Any other of the speakers that would like to reflect to one of the questions?
I wasn't a speaker, but
Sarah,
I'm happy to reflect. Yeah, I've been trying to pick up on the questions as we've gone through and chat.
Yeah, I've seen that. Very good. Thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. I think the main thing that's come out is about the numbers and about how we ensure that we're open to everybody. And I just want to reassure people that the notion of putting numbers on the groups is not at all to exclude people and to make it restricted or a closed club. We really do need everybody's inputs. And I think there've been some really helpful suggestions in the chat about how we do that. So having either open mailing lists or open documents so that people can see the progress as we go on. This is actually something we'd asked the task forces to consider. We had a section in the charters about the methodology, and I think maybe one thing we want to look at is making sure that the work is open, so you know, a much broader group can engage, because we do want to be as inclusive as possible, but it just has to be pragmatic about how the work gets done. And I think people have commented that, you know, the RDA model works well because there is, you know, naturally a smaller group that ends up doing the work actively, but anyone can kind of participate and then end up being more active in that if they find they've got the relevant skills and the time to contribute. And I think that's probably something we need to take away from the session today and think about how we implement that, because we do want to be inclusive.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question that has come up during the drafting of the charters is, will the task forces have support financially or in other ways from the association? Well, to be honest, the task forces will have to start with a very limited support in the beginning until we have some, let's say, money available in the association, when we will definitely also devote some of that to the task forces. Secondly, we will have support as we had in the drafting process initially from the EOSC Secretariat, and that's the type of support we will have to take over as an association in the course of this year. So yes, there will be support, but in the beginning it will be only voluntarily work basically, and gradually we will build up as much support as is needed for the specific topic. Other questions? Oh yeah, maybe another point that I mentioned in the very beginning, but when we opened this session, there were only something like a little bit more than 100 people on board, and now we have close to 300 people on board. So maybe it's good to reiterate. The drafting process for the next phase of the Horizon Europe program will be started by the Commission the second half of this year already. And in order for us to, let's say, help the Commission with our SRIA, that's the intention of the partnership, with this drafting process, to come up with the right calls in the near future, it is important that these task forces start up as quickly as possible. So we will continue pushing a little bit, although some people think it's going too fast, other people may think it's going too slow, but we will do our best to get these task forces up and running as soon as possible, so they can contribute to the next version of the SRIA, and they can contribute in that way through the interaction with the Commission to the next calls for the year 23, 24 and after. So this is one of the important things for the task forces to do. A question in the chat, Karel, what roles would you like industry experts to take an active part in the contribution, and how? The EOSC Association is not limited to only public bodies, also industrial bodies or for-profit organizations even can be a member of the EOSC Association. But we're still working on our statutes and on our bylaws. And so far we've said the statutes and the bylaws will be drafted by the public organizations, the not-for-profit organizations, and there will be most likely regulations with respect to who can share task forces, who can be in the board, and that will put some limitations. But yes, we will work closely with industry people in as well the task forces as in the organization as a whole. Can some of you pick up on some of the other questions in the chat maybe?
Yeah,
Yes,
so just one of the points about the engagement of the RI clusters.
Yep.
I suggest we take that subject tomorrow. There's a dedicated session on that. We can come back to that point then.
Thank you, Bob. And maybe it's good to mention that the next 2 days there will be, of course, these sessions on the task forces, and that is an appropriate place also to ask further in-depth questions with respect to the content of the work the task forces are doing and are going to do. And let me see if I can pick up another one. No,
yeah, maybe Romaine's comment
Yes.
about the observer status. I think,
Yep.
you know, again, this is a useful model. I think we want people to be able to at least see the work and contribute in some way, whether that's through open consultations or having completely open documents. So we'll certainly look into that. And I think this concern people have about, you know, maybe not having a legal entity, being part of a group that can't officially be a member of the EOSC Association, or if you're in the UK and at the moment you currently can't be a member of EOSC Association, that doesn't restrict or exclude you from volunteering to be part of task forces. So do still respond to the call, and internationals can as well. So, you know, we would encourage you, if you think there's a particular expert or people who should be involved in this work, and if they're willing to, who are, you know, overseas, then do ask them to get involved too, because what we're doing in EOSC isn't just limited to Europe. We do need to align with all the other international open science initiatives.
Absolutely right, Sarah. Thank you for that. So again, to reiterate this point, everybody can be a member of a task force, of course, depending on skills and competences and the things that are needed. These are the most dominant factor, apart from being, let's say, as diverse as is needed. And even wider, as you suggest, and this is suggested in the chat, we can have sort of an observer status of task forces as well, like we have the observer status in the association. At this moment, every organization, also outside of Europe, can be an observer in the EOSC Association. Other points to pick up on?
There was a question that was already answered by Sarah, but I think it's worth to insist. So one comment about having a task force summit, and I think it is something that we identified, that there are a lot of connections that need of homogenization, and this is really the focus that we would like to do.
Thank you very much, Ignacio.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and
We would like to start off with such a session, let's say September, October, to get all the chairs, prospective chairs of the task forces together to find the links that are important and to help creating these links. Sarah, you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that. I mean, one of the reasons why we felt that was important is because everything's been running in parallel. So we've been trying to develop these charters as quickly as possible and to get information out to everybody. But that has meant that there hasn't been time for the different task forces to really look at each other's work and to identify those like dependencies across them. So it is, there probably will be changes that are needed in the different charters based on kind of overlapping work or things where they, you know, there's contingencies.
Yeah, maybe it's good to reiterate, by the way, that the charters are online, and maybe Garrett, you can put in the chat the link to the online position of the draft charters. So this is not a consultation round, but people that feel very peculiar about one of the drafts, they won't hesitate to mention this to us.
Yeah, and the other thing that's coming up a lot in the chat just now is about the credit. So Neil had mentioned the model that they use in the is it the research groups or the software groups, trying to identify people who are active and who are authors or people who've commented at some point. And it is quite hard to track all of that. I think that's something that we should probably put as a specific task for the association and the board to make sure we have a mechanism that we run across all the task forces for doing that. And yeah, it's important for people to get recognition and rewards for these various inputs.
Yep. Further answers or suggestions from either the chat or from the group here? Maybe it's good to then tell a little bit on where we stand as an association. This was, I'm sure, mentioned in the opening session yesterday, but not everybody has attended this opening session. So we are about to sign what is called MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the European Union, signed by the European Commission. And this will be during the RNI days on the 23rd of June, where a number of commissioners will be live present on screen, of course, and then 11, if I'm correct, of the co-program partnerships will be signed. As the program looks at the moment, the EOSC will be the first to be signing the MOU with the European Commission. And after this signing, there will be the MOU in place, giving commitments on the side of the European Commission and giving commitments on the side of the association. And one of the things we have to do from the association is to come up what is called an additional activities plan. We have been reaching out to our mandated members recently to pick up what type of activities that are in line with the SCRIA that are being done by the members of the association, and maybe also outside the members of the association. We have to look at that as well, because there is much more outside the members of the association than within the members, to be honest, because there's more organizations there, and see what can be counted as additional activities in the developing of the EOSC. This will be a topic of discussion on the first, what is called partnership board meeting. And this partnership board is the two members of the partnership, being the European Commission and the association. And we have a standard invitation to what is called the EOSC steering board, an expert group of the Commission composed of the different countries. And they will have a standing invitation to this partnership board meetings in order to also link extra closely to the countries and the associated, the member states and the associated countries. And in this partnership board, we will discuss how these additional activities will be counted by the Commission. The Commission is still working on that. This holds for all the co-program partnerships. And we will discuss items for the next version of the SCRIA, how this will be handled by the Commission in respect to phrasing the calls for the next part of Horizon Europe. Any other questions or suggestions from my board members on this particular issue?
So it's not on this issue, but one thing I think we do also need to provide some clarity on is when the membership call will open and close. I know we're all pushed for time, but I think it needs to be soon. So ideally, if we could get it by the end of this week, I don't know if that's feasible. So we can open it, you know, during this event at the end of the symposium. And I guess we need it open for a month, but we're probably still to finalize all the timelines on that.
Yeah, and as I said before, Sarah, also in the course of the time, people can of course show interest in the work of the task forces and try to become a member of the task force, but also over time, the task, and then I'm talking about a longer time frame, the task forces can change. Some of the task forces can finish their work and new task forces can emerge in the course of the period. And again, I'm talking about a longer timeline there. Then for people responsible of keeping research communities informed, it would be very useful to receive periodic digests with the opportunities to participate with clear descriptions and links. Claudia, I fully agree with you, and we have not been doing particularly well so far in the communication part. That's another thing which is worthwhile mentioning. For those that have been in the opening session yesterday, they have met Ute Gunzenheimer, the designated Secretary General for the association. And from this moment on, we are starting to build on the communication effort of the association. Please excuse us for having a group of, let's say, 9 volunteers in the board of this association and no means to do the work that we have been doing so far. So we are building up the office of the association in the near future, and definitely this type of reports and the communication has to increase enormously. This will be there will be a regular newsletter soon coming out. We've already collected people that are interested in the newsletter, and there is a call open in the near future for what is called a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, different type of person than for a company, of course, but the type of person that can help the office of the association to link to all the projects, the technical parts of the project. So please take a look in the near future on the advertisement. We will send it around Europe to all the members and all the observers, and people can apply for this position. We really hope that this is an important position again in the association. We hope to find the right person. So by the end of the year, we hope that we have built up some of the capacity of the office and keep on building in the next year. And I'm sure then the communication will also increase, and we will help the task forces also with their communication. Further points to pick up on?
I sense we've covered most of the points in the chat. The chat's got quieter. We still actually have 20 minutes left or so before the coffee break. So I was wondering whether anyone actually had content questions. A lot of the questions we've answered are really about, you know, how we set up groups, how we administer them, how we're making sure things are open. But, you know, the presentations also covered, you know, what the different task forces will do. And I assume on the call, on the webinar here, we have got people who've been coordinating the drafting or the writing of those. So maybe people have any kind of content questions around the different topics. There had been ones, you know, about the business model and timelines on that, but are there other things people want to raise? It's a question about comms experts.
Yeah,
in each task force.
well, whether there should be experts in every task force, I don't know, but definitely in the task forces, there should be people that are concerned with respect to communications, communications in the direction of the wider community communications, also, of course, with the liaison persons to the association itself. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I mean, in this setup phase of the task forces, there has been a person designated from the EOSCsecretariat project for each task force to help with administering the meetings. But, you know, if we have a support role like that, they could also help ensure that we, you know, we have these quarterly updates or information that goes out in newsletters and make sure there's good communication about progress.
Yep, there is support planned, Owen, from the Secretariat in the somewhat longer run. We will hire people for that. And maybe it's good to mention also that we are reaching out, starting to reach out to the projects. An important project we have reached out and we have regular discussions with already is EOSC Future. It's by far the largest and the most involved project for the coming well, 30 months, I think it is. that will help us in getting this starting period done, because the actual work that needs to be done needs time and money, and hopefully this contribution from EOSC Future will be a major part in setting up the initial phases of EOSC.
Yeah. We've got a few more things in chat now. There had been a comment from Nicholas Blomberg about open consultation being important, and timing's an issue on that. Obviously, we need to make sure there's sufficient time for people to respond, and concerns that we can't practice open science in closed settings. And, you know, absolutely agree. We have to make sure that we're working as much as possible in the open and making sure people have opportunities to respond. We will definitely, you know, take that on board in how we're setting up the groups. And Tiziana's got a question: how will the activities of EOSC related projects be coordinated with the EOSC ASBL and task force activities? I think within all the different charters, you will see notes of key project inputs, or, you know, kind of dependencies on projects. We have mentioned to people when they've been drafting the charters that, you know, we need to build on existing activities, and lots of the things they may be doing will already be covered. So ones I've been involved in, like the FAIR group, for example, we'd built on the work of FAIR's FAIR around metrics and the work that's come out of RDA on the FAIR maturity indicators, and use that work, and that's been picked up in the task force. And we do want all of those alignments. I think Karel had mentioned that, you know, we expect members of the projects to be involved in the task forces as well. So we'll make sure that that's all linked up.
Who can reflect to Simon Hodgson's question on the PID policy? And he says that's fine, but I hope this is a first stage activity, and EOSC will need to move on rapidly beyond the PID to policy on metadata, semantics, and so on.
So I think that kind of addresses two things. So there wasn't just a PID policy, there was also the PID architecture, which came out of the architecture group, which is looking at the infrastructure needed to implement the PID policy. But also the aspects around metadata and semantics are covered in the EOSC interoperability framework. That's kind of been split across two task forces. So we have, I forget all the names now. We have a task force that's dealing with semantic interoperability, yes, which Oscar Corso was one of the coordinators on, to pick up on that interoperability work. There was also a technical interoperability task force, I think. So that should be covered.
Yeah, maybe to come back to your point, Sarah, on having input and not moving too fast. This is a process, as Bob already mentioned. The EOSC abbreviation has been around for 4 or 5 years, and we are still working on what it actually is and to implement it. So it will not happen overnight. And yes, there will be a lot of feedback and consultation possibilities, as we have seen also in the previous 2 years. So it's not something which we can, with a turn of a knob, immediately install. And thus, reiteration with the community is an important process. I'm sure that will take place, and we will create the opportunities for that. There's a question on funding. Bob, maybe you can pick on that. The last one on funding, I assume there's awareness, etc.
Okay, so specifically for OCRA, OCRA will be presented during the latest session on sustainability tomorrow. So there we can get we can go into more detail. Now it depends which specific problems we're talking about here. There have been delays, my understanding with OCRA, there have been delays caused by the model which has to be implemented, restricted by the financial instrument that was used for that project, and that has caused some issues. Okay, my understanding is that the coordinator, Jean, has been investigating a number of alternative mechanisms, discussing with governments, and they believe that they will have a solution which they can hopefully announce in the short term. But as you say, this is one project, right? And I think we have to take on board the lessons learned from the OCRA project and make sure that such sort of stalls to the process that was put in place there do not occur in the larger model that gets put in place for the European Open Science Cloud.
Thank you, Bob. Then
Yeah.
Jan Meyer gives a good suggestion of having task forces working together. Jan, it's not the intention to have a startup meeting with all the task force members. I was talking about a startup meeting with the chairs of the task forces, and it's exactly this topic you address. How do we get to how do we get the interaction going between the task forces?
Yeah, there's a question further up, like we've missed, from Andy Gotts as well. Will the EOSC task forces choose and propose solutions, e.g. for AAI and PIDs, or will they focus on only reviewing and federating existing solutions? And takes the example of AAI, whether we'll have one AAI or many. I think one of the principles we've worked to, like certainly in what we did in the FAIR working group previously, is that we want to be as inclusive as possible. So, you know, we can't have, you know, one approach to PIDs. There are multiple PIDs, there's lots of different service providers. We want to ensure that, you know, we're enabling all of those and interoperability across them. I think the same applies with AAI. There was a comment from Licia there. In terms of whether the task force chooses and proposes, I think it's a collaboration between the task forces and the implementation projects, because the task forces, it's a volunteer effort. They're not the people, well, I mean, if they're in the projects, they kind of are, but they're not the people who are actually doing the implementation work. So it's about kind of working together, ensuring that we get the community input to help steer the choices that are made on those implementation projects. And in some cases it might be, so for instance, the PID policy that was drafted within the FAIR working group because none of the projects had this as a deliverable or a task within their remit. Now the projects fed into that significantly. So the Freya project, members of that were involved in that task force, as were many other projects. So it was the task force itself that wrote it, but it had the inputs from the others. In other cases, the projects probably are delivering pieces of work about, you know, this is our approach to AAI, and the task force will be kind of reviewing, getting community feedback and helping steer it. So I think it could go kind of either way, but it needs to be a collaboration between the implementation projects and the task force. And really the task force is a vehicle to get all of that community input, I would say.
Ignacio,
yes,
you wanted to add something here?
Just to add exactly with the part of the AAI, that I mean, the aim also is to provide recommendations for making this interoperability in federation possible. I think that will be really useful for outcome from the task forces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then there's a few useful comments in the chat again on from Viel, for example, on having how we can have the task forces work together and interact as good as possible. Please keep on putting your suggestions in the chat. We will, of course, save the chat and we will look at it carefully, and all the suggestions coming in there are very, very well welcome. Any other question we can comment on? This is a comment, not a question. Other things people would like to see added or information we can give on the association at this point?
Yeah, so possibly to pick up on Simon's point again, he's noted about, you know, the interoperability and reusability questions and the importance of metadata and semantics. And I think I completely agree. This is the biggest kind of open challenge we have. So aspects like PIDs are further developed. You know, we've got strong policies, we've got a lot of infrastructure in place. But yeah, I think this ability to map between different community standards to have some kind of cross search and interoperability is one of the major challenges we face now in EOSC. And I do think that's a real pressing priority. There is work going on in projects. So within FAIR's FAIR, there was a task that Ava Mendes had led that was working on this. There's work going on in EOSC Future, but I think this is something that, yeah, it's a key aspect for us to work on in the task forces as well. Hopefully, I'm trying to read the comments while I'm responding, so hopefully that's picking up on your point.
Very quickly.
They do.
Yeah. Maybe good to mention as well that the association will work closely together with the organizations in the rest of the world, and we will build up relationships with the developments taking place in other regions in the world, because this is not an isolated activity, as Sarah already pointed out earlier. And of course, over time, we have to come and agree on the possibilities that arise from different parts of the world and to combine them into a proper approach. We still see this as a sort of web of fair data, where theoretically in the very long run, all data sources could be combined with all other data sources, but then they have to be findable and can only be done by those that can access them. And one of those activities that is also starting up is, of course, Gaia-X. This is serving the industry community. We will have our second workshop with Gaia-X in the 30th of June. Maybe Bob or Klaus, you can mention something more specific on that. And our intention is to work closely together with them. It became clear to me that they also intend to have a very open structure, so that fits very fine. They serve another community than we serve, but it's really complementary. Bob.
Yeah, as you say, so there will be a meeting between the Gaia-X AISBL and the EOSC AISBL, EOSC Association AISBL, towards the end of the month. There are three main subject areas where we are looking for what are the possible synergies there. First of all, from the whole concept of data sharing. Of course, data sharing is the basis of the existence of EOSC. Gaia-X is looking to put data sharing in place for specific business sectors. There is also the aspects of how to do that data sharing in a trusted and sovereign environment, which is also relevant for many of the activities inside EOSC, because remember, we talk about fair data, and not all fair data is openly accessible to everyone. There is also the other aspects of alignment on the core functions in EOSC, which have a lot of similarities with the federating services that Gaia-X are also in the process of procuring at this moment of time. And then, of course, the technical challenges. We see that that's a preoccupation, a lot of work for EOSC, and can we share and have synergies in trying to find some of these technical solutions with Gaia-X.
Thank you, Bob. Suzanne, you've been actively involved in the S3 clusters, and we are also linking up to those. Maybe you could say a few words on where we stand there and how we hope to proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Karel. So there is this liaison we would like to establish with the EOSC task force, S3 EOSC task force. And we had a workshop last Friday, a whole-day workshop with the science cluster, where Maria Luisa, Bob, and myself were to discuss how the science cluster can be represented, can be actively involved in the association. So this is where we are today, and what we have to discuss now within the board is what kind of liaison we can establish with S3 and with the science cluster. Most probably it will be the same one, and how we can maybe work on a strategy to ensure or to secure the presence and the role of the science cluster and the research infrastructure inside the EOSC Association. This is the next step on which we have to work.
Thank you, Suzanne. Then maybe an important item. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Karel. Maybe we can discuss a bit or mention the work that we are doing on the statutes and the bylaws.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to, as you all know, we prepared the statutes of the EOSC Association have been written in a month last year, and it was in June actually, though exactly a year ago. And then we worked on the bylaws at the autumn, just before the General Assembly. But because of the emergency, we think that it could be useful to revise and to take a bit of more time to work on the statutes and the bylaws. So with Maria Luisa Lavitrano, we have already started to work on an updated version with not, most probably not a lot of change, but now we would like to continue this work with the new Secretary General, with Ute Gunzenheimer, who will help us for that. And of course, we expect to involve all members of the EOSC Association in order to get your view and to have more or less a final version of statute and bylaws for the EOSC Association.
Thank you, Suzanne. The aim is that at the end of this year, in December, we will have another General Assembly, let's say a normal one, hybrid, most likely. We will have a written General Assembly in between, by the way. And in this General Assembly at the end of the year, we hope that we can present the new draft of the statutes as well as the bylaws. It's important that we do this properly and take our time for it so that we do not have to change the statutes and bylaws in every General Assembly meeting that is coming up. And so we hope to reach something stable. And we will have some more experience by that time as well. An important item to mention as well is the fact that with this co-program partnership, we also have committed as an association to monitor the developments taking place in Europe in the form of KPIs and to report on that in the Commission. So we also will definitely need dedicated people in the association to do this reporting, monitoring process. The Commission has several layers of monitoring. One is for the whole Horizon Europe program. Another layer is for the co-program partnerships. They have to monitor certain things aligned. The Commission tries to align this as much as possible, understandably. And the third layer is, of course, the partnership itself, the EOSC partnership, where we have to do the main task on monitoring what's going on. This will be a difficult task because we have a lot of members and there's a lot of activities outside of the members in the countries. And in order to get a good picture of what's going on and to report on that to the Commission and thus to the community will be a huge task. On the other hand, we want to have a feeling for how things are developing in the countries, how things are developing with our members. We are closing almost this session, and I look at my colleagues, board members that are in the session, and Sarah just joined us. She was not a speaker, so she has a different background. Welcome, Sarah. But see if there's other things our speakers and the board members in this session would like to add. Yep, Bob.
I'm not sure if we actually stated it, but a really big thank you to all the charter drafting groups in the work they've put in to date. We wouldn't be here without them.
Good point, Bob.
Yeah, very, very good point. And also, I mean, I've found this session incredibly useful. I think it's given us some really good steers. So thanks to all of the audience for the comments and the suggestions as well. And the next session after coffee is another interactive one. So bring all of those opinions and views to that too.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Then there's Chris asking about a written AG. I assume he means a written GA, a General Assembly. Yes, the statutes foresee that you can also do in writing a consultation with all the members. And we have been, as a board, accepting new members and new observers as provisional members and provisional observers, and we need the commitment from the General Assembly for that. And the other item is that we need the formal commitment of the General Assembly with respect to the activity, to the advisory groups we have created, Chris. So those are the two main topics for a written consultation to the General Assembly over in the middle of the year. And with that, I would like to mention one more thing before we close off. I have a feeling that we are sort of at a turning point with respect to EOSC. If I look at the history, I've seen many projects doing a lot of valuable and incredible amount of work. But it has been a sort of creolization divergence phase where these projects were doing their things, but not necessarily coordinated. And we really hope that this is changing in the near future. And one of the mechanisms the Commission has created for having this conversion taking place is that all the future projects in Horizon Europe have to report to the EOSC Association regularly. And thus there will be a link with the SCRIA, there will be a link with the work being done. 2 links actually. The calls will already be based on the developments of the SCRIA, and then the coming projects from that will have to report to the association as well, and that hopefully will cause a convergence phase rather than a divergence phase in the coming years. It's a slow process. We will take our time. Again, I would like to thank the audience. I would like to thank the speakers, and I especially for this topic would like to thank all the charter involved people that did all the work in writing these draft charters. Please take a look at them, and hope to see you in the next sessions where we will go in more depth on the task forces. Thank you for attending this session, and see you in the next session. Bye-bye.